I want to start by introducing Aparna and have our first fireside chat. Aparna is SVP of Products, run all of products at Vercel. She has an extensive experience working both on the enterprise side at Capital One, prior jobs at Google, running the developer products, and now at Vercel, where they are doing a lot in MCP and AI. So there's an opportunity to ask some engaging questions and learn about the MCP experiences. Please, Aparna, join us. All right.
Thank you, Rishi. I'm delighted to be the first tool call.
First tool call, yes. Authenticated. So I think from the conversations we have had over the last 6 months, I mean, MCP is what? November 2024, MCP came around, and it's been such a hype. It's been such an exciting journey. I think I would love to start by hearing, as at Vercel or your prior experience, what are the enterprise use cases that you're seeing, Agentic AI use cases that you're seeing, not just MCP in general, Agentic AI use cases, because a lot of the audience here is founders, developers, and what is the opportunity in front of us, all of us as a community, to kind of explore new areas? So that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, let me start maybe a little bit. You introduced me already.
Yeah.
I spent 10 years at Google, initially working on Kubernetes and then serverless products in Google Cloud, and then leading developer experience for Google Cloud. Part of that was building, it wasn't called Agentic Applications at the time. It was, and now it's called Gemini Code Assist. But I think one of the main areas for agents has really been developer tooling and the engineering function overall. And then I went from Google to a place called Capital One, and I've worked in enterprise most of my career. Capital One is a bank, highly regulated, obviously in a highly regulated industry. And we were building there an agentic platform. You know, in most enterprises, there are so many use cases for generative AI to automate processes. You can think about customer service. You can think about, in a bank, you have audits, you have compliance, you have all these different functions, of course, legal and HR everywhere. And most of the work that you want to do in that kind of institute is automation of those manual processes. And that requires hooking into various systems inside an enterprise. And so there was no real sort of standard way of hooking up LLMs with these systems. Many of the systems and much of the data inside an enterprise that generative AI would use is sort of unstructured. So it's not typically in a Snowflake or a Databricks, even though those are like, the best tools, and most enterprises have those. But the data that is used for generative AI is unstructured data. It could be in the form of audio transcripts from your calls with customer service. It could be in the form of knowledge bases that are being used by your end users. And tapping into that information in a way that an LLM can understand it and take decisions on it and reason over it, not very easy. And so I think before MCP came around, people were sort of doing a lot of these integrations bespoke. They were looking at their APIs and saying, well, how should I call this API? And should I call it in the context of this workflow? Well, maybe the API is not actually well architected to be called in that way. And certainly in an enterprise where a lot of these things were designed before AI, it was not easy. So I was very excited when I heard about MCP, and I think Capital One is a very forward-leaning enterprise, so they were very excited. I joined Vercel earlier this year, so just a few months ago.
Wow.
And I joined Vercel because it's a super exciting. It's a super exciting kind of startup, even though it's a little older than a startup.
Fast-growing startup.
It's like a Series E startup. Very fast-growing, really good revenue. Has this vibe coding product called V0. And I think we were very curious about MCP at Vercel. Initially, it was not clear that you need. So Vercel is a developer platform. It's all about developers. Every customer is a developer. Obviously, the developer space is being totally transformed by generative AI, but it wasn't clear that developers wouldn't just use the CLI. Why would you need an MCP server? And then there were all these questions about the security of MCP servers. So in an enterprise context, you have a lot of control. You're kind of putting everything, inside your four walls. In fact, you might not even be using LLMs outside your VPC. But Vercel is a public cloud, and it's just we were very cautious about MCP to begin with.
Interesting, very interesting. So I think you guys launched the MCP server, what, 2 weeks now? Almost?
Yeah.
I would love to share or hear your experiences on how did you think about it? How did you think about what capabilities go in the MCP server, where to put the guardrails, what agents connect? Because I think you're right. I mean, for a company like Vercel, where it's out on the cloud, it's not guardrails, it's not guarded, and you're launching an MCP servers for your customers to connect. It's not even for internal use cases. So I'm sure there were a ton of learnings and thought process that went behind it.
Right. So I think we were always excited about MCP. I think we were curious about when is it going to be secure enough, and is this protocol going to develop in a way that can be super usable. I think it was really dependent on a few people joining. I was I would call MCP pilled in Vercel language, and then I think Alan is here somewhere. He was a new engineer that joined our team, and he was very MCP pilled. So it just takes a couple of people. At Vercel, we say you can just ship things. So we worked on it, and initially we made it a read-only server. So that kind of, and then there was the question of should we do local or should we do a remote server? And a remote server we inherently felt would be more useful. But local server, a lot of other companies were doing local servers, and maybe that gives the developer more control, and you have less responsibility. But we, in the end, decided to do a remote server. That's what we launched, and it's read-only, so that kind of prevents certain things. And then so you call this MCP server from any client. Right now, we support Claude Code, we support Cursor, we support a number of VS Code. So we support a number of different AI clients, and you can view your Vercel deployments, your deployment logs, your team, your projects. Those are some of the things you can do. It's a read-only thing. You can use it for troubleshooting. Obviously, we would like to make it more active. We'd like people to be able to make deployments, but that is pretty complicated. And so right now it does have OAuth enabled, but it's not yet.
I think, by the way, you guys still, Vercel is one of the few large companies or the leading companies to deploy MCP servers which are remote. There's a handful, if I count around, like HubSpot also launched a local MCP server, not a remote, even though if you look at their connections with ChatGPT and others, is using MCP, but they don't have a public. And they have been very forward-leaning in all of this race. Atlassian is one that did a remote MCP server. So very handful, because these challenges are real, and you need to make sure you have the right guardrails, or you will have a compromise. And I'm sure some of you guys have heard the whole Replit story at hand, which was a big awakening for all of us. Maybe shifting gears, Aparna, I think one of the questions I get asked often when we talk to some of the large organizations, or even smaller, high-growth companies, is what kind of AI products or what kind of agentic AI use cases will be successful? Like, do you have an opinion on what agentic AI use cases will be adopted first in the enterprise, which will come later? What are you seeing as you talk to growth companies or the enterprise companies?
Yeah, so this is my opinion.
Yeah.
Having worked in enterprise for a little bit on, agentic AI. I mean, agentic AI is so new that I don't think anybody has worked on it for very long. I worked on it for about a year, but what I found is that it started with, okay, let's use LLMs, and LLMs have so many use cases. We had hundreds of use cases. We basically did a call for use cases, and every department had like 10 or 20 use cases because there's so much unstructured data and so many processes that would like to be automated and can be automated using LLMs. But the first wave was essentially using retrieval augmented generation because you want to get around the hallucination problem, particularly in a regulated enterprise. You must have a correct answer. But with many things we found, actually the accuracy was not good enough. Even with retrieval augmented generation, I mean, for search, it was okay, and you'd have to do a lot of work. You'd have to do, you have to kind of get the right embedding model, you have to get the right re-ranker. There's a lot of data science work and that has to be done in an enterprise to make even retrieval augmented generation work well. But for some of the more sophisticated use cases, that's not sufficient. And that's where Agentic AI came in and sort of these, I think it was really more of a research topic, but starting to think about, okay, what if we had sort of smaller models which were fine-tuned specifically for particular parts of the process. And then you chain them together. And maybe you even had some loops to sort of check whether a particular plan was the right plan and put a lot of guardrails around it. So it really became more of an AI system, and you can call it an agentic system. I think most things then we realized are going to actually move in that direction, that just having retrieval, so RAG is sort of part of that workflow, but it's, you have basically like an understanding agent which is interfacing with the customer. Yeah. And that is, has your vocabulary, is fine-tuned on your vocabulary and on understanding. Then you have sort of a planner agent, which might be maybe a very large model. Yeah. And then you have sort of like the something to check that planner, right? To evaluate, maybe simulate whether that is actually the right answer. And of course, each of these agents has access to different tools. It's calling tools and has access to different knowledge bases that are appropriate. So that became the sort of the agentic system. And I think we found that that gives you the best accuracy, that gives you, more reliability, maybe even an audit trail, which are all important in a regulated enterprise.
One thing it's interesting that you mentioned, and I'm seeing this trend consistently with different organizations I talk to, people are picking very different use cases, but most of the use cases where they're seeing value is where their own internal data, their internal tools, their internal context adds value back.
Absolutely.
And that's where, like, for example, in the insurance vertical, we are seeing use cases where just writing the email for either rejecting a claim, like let's say life insurance scenario, rejecting a claim or accepting a claim needs to be legally compliant based on the laws, needs to be medically, and then needs to be the right emotional tone if you're rejecting a life insurance claim for a certain person. And there is so much context that exists within the organization, and they're able to do these tasks much better than a human would. And similarly, we're working with a large education company where the CEO said, I'm going to have finance, sales, engineering, every team have an MCP server, automated use cases, because there's so much internal knowledge over the decade that they've collected. And now they need to put that to knowledge to use to kind of accelerate the productivity. So I think internal context, internal data is becoming the big piece.
I would kind of separate the use cases into sort of internal enterprise facing versus external customer facing. And obviously you have to be very careful with the external customer facing ones, but they are quite exciting. So like one of the external customer facing ones that I've seen, and I see it also at Vercel with some of our customers, is in the travel industry, right? Providing an agent, like a concierge, who's going to help you plan your next trip. And this is a very hard one. This is a difficult one, but it's doable, and multiple people are working on it. So that's one.
I would absolutely love it. We as a family take a lot of trips, so travel agent use case is a killer one, especially because it's very personalized to you.
Yeah. So another one that I'm seeing is a shopping agent. And this is real, right? Like, somebody that's going to, or an AI that's going to shop for you, maybe through ChatGPT or through Perplexity or one of these.
I think, by the way, that's actually an open question. I think there's a lot of talk on these agents with a lot of chatter also on the other side, especially with shoppings, like where is the boundary drawn? I had a conversation with some folks, and the question was, if on a bidding site an agent bids on behalf of a user and bids a much higher value and wins that bid, who is liable? Is the user who gave the instruction to the agent liable? Is the bidding site liable? Because the seller has sold it and lost money if the bid is not fulfilled. So some open questions there,
Right.
for sure. Very good. Switching gears a little bit, Aparna, I would love to, I think, as a technologist, as a person building for this space, one of the questions I've always wondered is like, what are the key things that organizations should keep in mind, or what are the challenges that you think they are facing or will be facing in near future as they adopt Agentic AI or other AI use cases? Like, what are you seeing some of the hindrances and challenges?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest questions is keeping up with AI technology. Which model should you use is an important question. And because the rate of change with models is pretty extensive. You have new models coming out, and you want different models for different use cases. Like for coding, you want a different model versus like maybe for shopping, a different model. And then the level of control that you'll have on these models and the ability to fine tune them, that's another piece. And the price is super important, particularly when you talk about agentic applications, which will have multiple LLM calls. Right? The price, how expensive this becomes, is quite important in any kind of enterprise context, because you have to do the math of, okay, I'm automating this workflow, it's going to save me this much money, or it's going to win me that many new customers, but it needs to be cost efficient. So I think that's very important, and that's a place where I'll plug Vercel.
Yeah.
We have an AI gateway that allows you to basically swap out models. We have hundreds of models, and I would recommend this to every company that you want to maintain choice because things are changing so quickly, and you want to build your infrastructure in a way that you can have multiple providers for any given model. This is one piece of feedback we have heard from companies. For example, some of our customers are customer service agents. Like they are building agents for customer service. They're very popular with many enterprises. But if they tie themselves to one particular provider, LLM provider, and that LLM provider is not doing well on a particular day, then their service is affected, and their customers blame them, not the LLM provider.
It's actually an interesting one, because I remember the days when public cloud came out, and there's this very high resistance on the CIO's part. It says, am I betting everything on one cloud provider, and what happens with the cost? But they had no choice. In this case, you're right, you have a choice. Vercel providing options to switch out models, you being able to test models, and pretty much I think that kind of changes the game, because, and again, going back, MCP offers that. Right now, here is an abstraction layer. You can switch out your choice of LLM, and standard protocols work. So that's actually a good one.
Yeah, the standard protocol is a big enabler. Yeah. So choosing model, and then if you're a startup builder, you want to not tie yourself to one thing. And also there are certain rate limits. As a startup, you might hit those rate limits. So if you can work with an aggregator that gives you higher rate limits, that's good. But in an enterprise, you have to control the costs. The other piece is the actual architecture of the application. You want to make it a low latency application, and how do you do that? So the other choice is around, do you use smaller open source models, or do you use the larger commercial models? And I think you have to think about the architecture. Where do you need the larger model, and where can you make do with a smaller model? So if you think about the architecture of some of these coding apps, which are agentic, V0, which is our vibe coding app, is a agentic app, right? You've got multiple different agents that are specialized for certain tasks. Like one is helpful in planning what you want to build, another is an actual creation of the Next.js app, et cetera. So you can choose to use different models for different purposes, and that's really the way to optimize the latency and the cost. Most of these agentic applications that you're seeing in engineering, they're they're composition of different models.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I think given the time constraint here, I would love to open to the audience for a couple of questions, and we can get handheld mics for the audience. Question in the back. Can we get? Aris, can we get a handheld mic? Yeah. There. Thank you.
Hi.
Yeah. So just quick question, is V0 using any MCPs internally that we don't know about? Just like how MCPs work internally on Vercel?
Yeah, so there's two ways to use MCPs on Vercel. One is that you can build an MCP server and host it on Vercel, and we have like a whole guide on how to do that and how to set up OAuth and how to make it a secure MCP server. The other, which we should talk with Descope about making that even better. And then the other is to use the Vercel MCP, which you can use for your deployments, as I mentioned. And it's a read-only today. We would love to make it a more active. As soon as we launched it, we got like a barrage of requests. You asked me like, what happened after? What was the learning? The learning was like everyone wants everything today.
Yes, 100%. By the way, I'm gonna, time permitting, I'm gonna do a demo of an MCP server hosted on Vercel, built with all of the Vercel libraries and showing the right access controls. But I think from my perspective, the easy deployment of MCP servers will unlock so much for every company. So it's incredible.
Yeah, I am using the MCP server. I love it. Like and you can use it from whatever client, like Claude. I don't really like Claude Code because it eats my money. But I prefer Anthropic, the chat version of it. Eats a little less money, or Cursor. You can use it from any of them, and it's just so seamless. It's so nice to be able to access your tools.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm on the enterprise side, and I wanted to ask a question from an enterprise perspective. Right, a lot of the big players are still not having MCP servers to offer their services. The 5 S's I call ServiceNow, Stripe, SAP, Salesforce, Slack. They still don't have MCP servers available for them to interact and connect. Should we build for them? Should we build on top of them in the interest of time, or should we wait for them to host?
This is an interesting question. I'll share what I'm seeing. I think there are, first of all, maybe you had 2 questions in mind, or I'll interpret them as 2 questions. One is, why do some of these large companies like Salesforce and Slack and others don't have an MCP server? And then if they're not going to have, should we build, or what should we do? I think there's a couple of reasons why they don't have, if you ask me. One is, I believe technical challenges, which in this case I will say are smaller ones, even though we talked about some of the remote technical challenges and security and stuff. I think the big challenge, which has been declared publicly by even Mark Benioff and the Slack whole conversation, is if you open up your MCP server, and there's been talked enough in other contexts, even shopping contexts, like you open up your data to anybody to consume, then what? Because in some senses, there is an opportunity for all these companies to monetize on their own data and build the agent also, not just the MCP server. And if they don't monetize on that, so I think my opinion is what's going to happen is there will be some monetization model that will emerge because they would want to control the number of API calls, the data exiting the platform. And then what I am seeing in terms of what do you do in this case, most of our customers today are for internal use. This is their employees. They are not waiting because not worth waiting. They are absolutely standing up their own MCP servers with the API access. It's not very hard. You can absolutely build an MCP server. In fact, wipe code an MCP server and host, and then go from there. That's at least what we are seeing. Do you want to add anything?
I mean, some of the learnings that we had if you are a user of Vercel, a paying, authenticated user of Vercel, you want that user to have MCP access from whatever AI client they're using, right? We would want that. And like I said, there's a ton of demand. So I would imagine that other companies also see that demand. Like if their customers, if their users are in some chat agent, then they want that customer to be able to access their services. But the challenge is, how do you make sure that that's an authenticated user and that's actually the user who's accessing you, and they're accessing the thing that they have access to, that they have paid for access to. So one of the questions we had, like we were trying to, we have some users that are using Devin, and Devin is actually this headless agent that is in, could be in a Slack channel with multiple people. And so one of the questions was, you don't know who is actually accessing Devin. And then Devin is performing operations on Vercel on behalf of this team, which maybe not the entire team should have access to all of this. Maybe not the entire team are actually users. So it raises all those questions. And ultimately, we don't charge for agents to access things. So we don't even have a pricing model for that. So those are all the things that need to be determined before I think people just that's why we made ours a read-only, for example.
Well, I think that was a great question, though. I know the clock is streaming at me. Aparna, maybe any other thoughts, closing thoughts you want to share with this group, or predictions for what do you see happening in the AI world in the next 12 months?
Well, we already discussed that I think everything is going to go agentic. I think that means that you need to provide picks and shovels for this agentic revolution. We are certainly doing that with the sandbox and with the gateway, as I mentioned, and optimizing compute, et cetera, for that. I think MCP, I feel like it's here to stay, and I feel like there will be, I like that it's open source and that there's this standard around it. Multiple LLM providers have embraced it, including Google Gemini, my former employer. So that's good, but there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, I think people are just starting to learn about, okay, MCP is different from my CLI and my API. Maybe I have everything in the CLI and API, but MCP, I can tailor it to a particular use case for a particular workflow, and it can have my docs, and by providing this context to the LLM, I actually save, like the LLM is not going to retrieve too much context and then forget what it actually needs to do. I can guide it. So I think it's gonna happen. I'm really excited about agentic commerce, like I said, like some of the shopping use cases. I think those are going to really be, like
I'm more excited on the travel use case. Like shopping is easy for me. I pick up the same thing year over year. So, well, very, very good conversation here, Aparna. Thank you so much for your time. I hope the team enjoyed it, but I really appreciate you joining us.